The train hissed and groaned as it came to a stop, its iron belly steaming against the cold wood of Bitterroot Falls' platform. The mountain air bit like a blade. Ada Rose McAllister stepped down onto solid ground, her boots thudding heavier than she meant. The sound turned heads. Conversations broke mid-word. A dog stopped barking. She stood still, her gloved hands gripping the worn leather handle of her trunk. Breath caught in her throat like it didn't know how to move anymore. She knew what they saw, 6 feet 2 inches of woman built like she could carry an ox on one shoulder and a cabin on the other. Her winter coat strained at the seams, and her dark red braid was thick as a horse's tail looped over one shoulder like a battle rope. A child pointed. A man tipped his hat more out of shock than manners. And somewhere near the general store, a woman whispered the word unnatural. Ada didn't flinch. She never did. Not when they stared. Not when they whispered. Not even when they laughed. But today she wanted to. Because today she wasn't just a curiosity stepping off a train. She was someone's bride. Or she was supposed to be. She scanned the platform's stomach, twisting itself in knots. Where was he, Calder Greyhawk? The man who had written her 4 months of short, careful letters that smelled faintly of pine pitch and wood smoke. The man who never once asked for her photograph. The man who said he needed a woman with hands strong enough to build and a heart strong enough to stay. She had read that line 100 times, and now she stood waiting, every insecurity she'd ever swallowed rising like bile. What if he saw her and turned around? What if he walked up, realized how much she was, and left? Then she saw him. Not a tall man. Not a clean-shaven gentleman with polished boots and a pressed vest. No, this man stepped around the wagon with snow on his shoulders, a fur-lined coat that hung off him like a pelt, and a face like it had been carved from river rock. Harsh. Weathered. Real. His dark eyes locked on hers, and she saw it happen just like always. The flicker of realization. The pause. That split second of, oh, she's bigger than I thought. She braced for it. The flinch. The retreat. The stammered excuse. But it didn't come. Instead, he walked straight to her. Quiet. Solid. Like a man used to walking toward danger instead of away from it. He stopped just short of her trunk, looked up, way up, and said, "You don't look soft, and that's the first thing I've liked about you." Ada blinked. Calder didn't smile, didn't offer a hand. Just looked her dead in the eye like she was a storm cloud worth watching. "You're Calder Greyhawk?" she asked, voice catching on the chill. He nodded once. "You're early. The train was fast. Or you were running." Ada's jaw tensed. "Does it matter?" Calder glanced at the sky. Snow was falling in lazy spirals now. "It will if we don't move. The trail to the hollow turns bad after dark." He lifted her trunk like it weighed nothing and walked it over to a mule cart with thick wheels and a bed of packed hay. The mules snorted. She watched him move not with grace but with confidence born of necessity. The kind of man who didn't waste effort unless it mattered. She climbed up beside him without asking. When their shoulders brushed, she noticed the scar down his jaw, the nicked rifle behind the seat, the silence that sat on him like a second skin. As the cart rumbled forward, Ada kept her eyes on the wilderness. The town vanished behind them in less than 5 minutes. Nothing ahead but mountains. "Calder," she said quietly. "I know I'm not what you pictured." He didn't look at her, just snapped the reins and said, "No, you're not." That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just fact. The silence stretched. The wind picked up. Pines swayed like tall, gossiping sentries. Ada stared down at her gloved hands. If this is a mistake, just say so. Calder finally turned to her. His eyes weren't cruel. They weren't kind either. Just tired. Real. And deep enough that she felt her heart beat in places it hadn't in years. I buried my last wife 2 winters ago, he said flatly. Snow came early. Labor came late. She was small. Sweet. Couldn't hold the weight of the land, let alone the child. Ada's breath hitched. Calder didn't stop. So when I wrote to that agency, I didn't ask for sweet. I didn't ask for pretty. I asked for strong. He looked at her thin, and there was no flinch in his gaze. You showed up. They rode in silence after that. But something had shifted. By the time they reached the first ridge, the sun was bleeding out behind the trees, casting the Bitterroot Range in burnt gold and ice blue. The temperature dropped fast. Calder stopped to check the harness, muttering in a tongue Ada didn't recognize, soft syllables with rhythm, like river water over stone. What language is that, she asked. He looked over his shoulder. Salish. My grandmother's people. This land was theirs before it was anyone else's. Ada didn't know what to say. Lot of ghosts in these woods, Calder added. Best to speak their names right. Ada shivered, but not from the cold. As the last light died, they crested a hill, and there it was. Greyhawk Hollow. The house stood like a sentinel in the clearing, wide and low-built from rough-hewn timber and riverstone. Smoke rose from the chimney. The porch glowed with lamplight. Somewhere behind it, a barn hummed with the sound of animals and life. Ada's breath fogged. Calder pulled the mules to a stop. You sure you're ready? He asked. She stared at the home, at the trees standing like guards, at the empty porch. No, she said truthfully, but I didn't come all this way to be soft either. A ghost of a smile flickered across Calder's lips. Good. 'Cause the mountain doesn't wait. Snow flurried around Ada as she climbed down from the wagon, her boots landing in the deepening slush. The reins felt stiff in her gloved hands, but she held them firm, guiding the mules the last few yards toward the house. The wooden porch stretched long and wide, and the home itself looked older than the mountains behind it, tougher too. Calder walked beside the cart, one hand resting lightly on the side rail, watching her with the kind of silence that carried more weight than words. The doors swung open before they reached the steps. A woman stood in the doorway, her figure silhouetted by firelight. Thin, gray-haired and straight-backed like a rifle barrel. She didn't smile, didn't wave. Ada knew immediately this was the housekeeper. You're late, the woman said. Calder didn't blink. Storm stalled us. The woman's eyes shifted to Ada, and for a long moment, she didn't say anything at all. Then she stepped back from the doorway. Bring her in before she freezes. Ada followed Calder inside, ducking slightly as she entered. The warmth of the hearth hit her like a wall. It smelled of cedar stew and old stone. The walls were lined with heavy beams, polished dark by age and smoke. There was a woven blanket draped across a rocking chair near the fire, and another hanging by the stairs, patterned with native beadwork and bear claws. The woman didn't offer her name. Calder dropped Ada's trunk in the corner. This is Inez, he said. She's the one that keeps me alive. Inez raised one brow, harder than it should be most days. I can imagine, Ada murmured. The older woman caught the edge in her voice and narrowed her gaze. You'll be sleeping upstairs. First door on the left. Will it be mine or hers? Ada asked, surprising even herself. Inez blinked, then looked to Calder. He said nothing. Just show her the room, Calder said quietly. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked under Ada's weight. Inez opened the door and stood aside. You'll find night clothes in the trunk. I'm not in the business of welcoming brides, but you seem too proud to be coddled. That might help you. Ada stepped into the room. The bed was huge, carved with mountain lion figures along the headboard. There was a rug from Dakota country, a heavy dresser, and a window that faced the tree line. On the sill, a candle flickered in a brass holder. As Inez turned to leave, Ada stopped her. Do you think I belong here? The older woman didn't even pause. That's not my question to answer. She closed the door. Ada sat on the edge of the bed, the frame creaking beneath her. Her fingers, still red from cold, fumbled to unbutton her coat. She wasn't shaking, but something inside her was moving like a fault line ready to split. Downstairs, she heard the low murmur of Calder's voice and the clinking of dishes. The house groaned under the weight of settling snow. Somewhere far off, a wolf cried out. She didn't feel safe. She didn't feel unwelcome either. She felt like the storm contained but waiting. Later, Calder knocked once. She rose, opening the door cautiously. He held out a small tin bowl of stew and a square of cornbread wrapped in cloth. You should eat, he said. Ada nodded, took it, but didn't invite him in. She didn't trust herself to speak. He didn't leave. You all right? She looked down at the food. I've slept in barns. This is fine. He shifted his wait eyes, scanning the room behind her. Inez thinks you're too proud. Inez doesn't know me. No, but I do. That pulled her eyes up. No, Calder. You don't. You don't know what I've been through. What I've had to survive to get here. He didn't flinch. Then tell me. Her hands tightened around the bowl. I've been stared at since I was 14. Too tall, too strong, too loud. My stepmother sold my family's house out from under me. Said a girl like me needed to learn humility. I scrubbed floors for pennies. I wrote to you with help from a clerk who thought it was funny that I couldn't spell my own name right. And then I got on that train knowing that whoever waited might laugh in my face. She looked up, fire blazing in her chest now. So no. I don't need rescued. I didn't come all this way to be rescued. A long silence stretched between them. Then Calder for the first time looked almost uncertain. Good, he said. I wouldn't know how to do it anyway. She huffed a breath that was almost a laugh. So what are we doing here, surviving? He said simply. Figuring out if we can do it better together than alone. Ada didn't answer, but she didn't shut the door either. He turned to go, then paused. Tomorrow I'll show you the boundaries of the land. It's big, wilder than you're used to. Might not like what you see. I'll manage. Calder looked at her once more, something unreadable in his expression. Then he disappeared into the hallway. The stew was hot and spiced. The cornbread crumbled perfectly. She ate every bite. That night, sleep came slowly. She lay beneath the heavy quilt, staring at the shadowed ceiling beams. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. Every wind outside the window sounded like voices calling from the trees. Still, she didn't feel fear. She felt ready. Morning broke in silver-blue slashes across the snow. When Ada came downstairs, Calder was already by the door, saddling 2 horses. Ever ride, he asked. Not often, she replied. You'll learn fast. She looked at the horses. Strong, unshod, Mountain beasts built for climbing, not comfort. He tossed her a pair of leather gloves. Keep close. Snow's crusty today. Ada climbed into the saddle, awkward but determined. Calder mounted beside her, and they rode side by side through the tall pines. The air was sharp, the woods quiet in that holy way only winter gives. An hour in, they crested a ridge overlooking the basin below. The valley stretched wide, ringed by sharp peaks like teeth. Calder pointed to a line of trees. That ridge marks the eastern edge. North runs until the old Salish well. South all the way to Coyote Creek. Ada followed the sweep of his hand. The land was vast, brutal, beautiful. Can you handle it? He asked. She didn't hesitate. Yes. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Calder smiled not with his mouth, but with his eyes. A flicker of something like trust, like hope. The snow softened beneath the horses' hooves as they returned to the hollow. The trees thinned into clearing again, the chimney rising like a signal from home. The morning ride had left Ada stiff but steady, the saddle no longer foreign beneath her. She could feel the rhythm of the horse's stride in her bones. Something grounding. Something primal. Calder dismounted first. He moved slower today, less like a stranger, and more like a man reacquainting himself with something forgotten. Ada slid down after him, her legs sore, but she kept her back straight. No limp, no complaint. As she led her mare toward the barn, she noticed Calder watching. Not openly, not obviously, but enough. Inside the barn was warmer than she expected. The scent of hay and animal sweat clung to the beams. She guided the mare into a stall and worked quickly, brushing her down, securing the reins, laying fresh feed. Calder didn't offer to help. He just nodded once, approving. When they entered the house, Inez was already at the stove, apron dusted with flower sleeves rolled to her elbows. She didn't glance up. "Coffee's hot," she muttered. "Don't drip on the rugs." Calder poured himself a cup, then reached for a second. "Ada." She nodded. "Thank you." He handed her the mug and gestured toward the sitting room. "I'll show you the house. If you're staying, you ought to know what's in it." They walked through the main floor, first thick planked floors, riverstone hearths, rugs with hand-stitched patterns. The furniture was heavy, well used, but cared for. Ada touched the edge of a bookshelf, noticing the faint grooves where fingers had rested again and again. "She liked to read," Calder said, catching her pause. "Your wife," he nodded. "Sarah. She had a favorite chair over there by the window. Sat for hours with books she brought all the way from Missouri." Ada didn't ask what happened to the books. She could see the empty shelf herself. The hallway stretched longer than she'd expected, leading past a small office, a room filled with saddles and gear, and then a closed door at the far end. Calder hesitated in front of it. His coffee was still steaming in his hand, untouched. This was going to be the nursery. The air shifted. Not colder exactly, but thinner, more fragile. "We painted it yellow," he continued. "Thought it might keep the shadows out." Ada said nothing, just waited. She died before I ever saw her hold him. It was snowing that night. Just like now. But it didn't feel peaceful. He didn't move to open the door. He didn't need to. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. Calder turned to her eyes, unreadable. "This house remembers ghosts, but it hasn't met you yet." Ada's throat tightened. "Is that your way of saying it's still haunted? It's my way of saying it's still waiting to see who you are." They moved upstairs. The hallway creaked beneath their boots. A long mirror hung crooked on the far wall, and dust lined the crown molding, where no one had touched in years. He stopped at the door across from hers. This was my mother's room. She stayed here after my father died. Ran the ranch herself for nearly 20 years. What happened to her? She got tired of the cold, Calder said quietly. Tired of burying people. Left one spring and never came back. Ada didn't ask how he felt about that. Some silences didn't need breaking. They reached the last door. It was cracked open. Calder pushed it gently with his boot. Inside was a small room sparsely furnished. A plain bed. A dresser. A wooden box at the foot of the frame. "This one's yours if you want it," he said. "The big room downstairs is for later if we figure out what this thing between us is." She stepped inside. The mattress was firmer than hers, but clean. The window overlooked a patch of bare trees. On the wall, an old portrait hung a woman with thick shoulders, dark eyes, hair braided down to her waist. "Your grandmother?" He nodded. "Esther Greyhawk. She rode horses better than any man on this mountain. Once took down a charging elk with a shovel." Ada smirked. "Sounds like someone I'd like." Calder's expression softened. "She would have liked you too." They stood in the room a moment longer, the quiet not uncomfortable this time. Then Calder said, "I need to check the eastern fence line. Storm knocked down some posts." "I'll come." "No need." Ada turned to him. "I said I'll come." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. Meet me in the barn in 10. He left. Ada ran her hand across the dresser top. There was a small crack down the center, like the wood had split and healed. She knew that feeling. She pulled on her coat again, tightened her braid, and followed. In the barn, Calder had already saddled the horses. She took the reins without waiting for permission. They rode east past the line of trees that marked the Greyhawk boundary. The air bit harder out here, no house to soften the wind. They found the fence, half-collapsed rails broken and wire dangling. Calder dismounted, pulling gloves from his coat. "We'll need to brace this. Won't hold until next thaw." Ada slid off her horse. "Then we brace it." He looked at her. Really looked. Most women would have stayed warm inside. "I didn't come here to be most women." She grabbed a spare post from the pack horse and drove it into the ground, her arms straining. Calder didn't stop her. Didn't help either. He just worked beside her, matching her pace, letting the silence speak for itself. By the time they finished, the sky had begun to darken. Snow threatened again on the edge of the horizon. They mounted, turning back toward the hollow. Calder said, "You held your own. I will again." He didn't smile, but his voice was less sharp now. "Tomorrow's the ceremony." Ada blinked. "What ceremony? The wedding?" "You and me." She paused. "Just like that, just like that." They rode on in silence for a while. Then Ada said softly, "Do I get to pick what I wear?" Calder shrugged. "You want frills? Inez might have a tablecloth." Ada laughed, breath curling in the cold. "I'll make do." Snow was falling again when Delilah Vaughn dismounted her carriage, her boots landing with a theatrical crunch on the frosted gravel outside Greyhawk Hollow. Her emerald satin coat flared like it belonged at a governor's gala, not on the porch of a timber-framed house in the Montana wilds. She swept up the stairs like wind through velvet, uninvited, but entirely unsurprised by the presence she claimed. Ada stood just inside the doorway, arms folded across the rough linen of her borrowed wedding dress. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't fitted. It had belonged to Inez 30 years ago, and smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. But it was clean and warm and real. Delilah's gaze dropped from Ada's face to her shoulders, her waist, and then back up like she was measuring a wall she didn't want to climb. "Well," Delilah said, voice syrupy with condescension. "Calder always did have a thing for projects." Ada didn't blink. "If you're here for a show, you came to the wrong theater." "Oh, I'm just paying my respects." Inez said the ceremony would be private. How quaint. Delilah stepped inside, uninvited snowflakes, clinging to her perfectly coiled blonde hair. A shame I didn't have time to prepare a proper gift. "You brought enough drama to count," Inez muttered from the parlor, not even looking up from her knitting. Calder appeared from the kitchen, shirt, half-buttoned suspenders hanging at his sides. He took one look at Delilah and sighed long and low. "What do you want?" "Is that any way to speak to a family friend?" she said, eyes still on Ada. "I came to witness history. The mountain man finally ties himself to something bigger than his ghosts." Ada's jaw clenched, but Calder's touch on her arm was gentle, steadying. "You don't belong here, Delilah," he said. "Neither does she," Delilah fired back. Ada stepped forward before Calder could answer. "You've had your say, now you can see yourself out." But Delilah wasn't done. She moved like she was still on some polished ballroom floor, not a wooden hall warmed by sweat and survival. "You know, my sister waited years for Calder to come to his senses. Grieved Sarah like the rest of us. But then he writes to some agency and brings back a woman who looks like she could wrestle a steer with her bare hands and win." Ada smiled slowly, not kindly. "And yet, here I am." Delilah's smile thinned. "This isn't a marriage, it's a storm warning." Calder's voice was low but sharp enough to cut through wood. "You need to leave." Inez stood suddenly imposing despite her thin frame. "If she won't walk out, I'll drag her out." That finally seemed to unsettle Delilah. Her smile cracked just slightly. She turned, gathering her coat like it was a crown. "Well," she said to the room, "I'll pray for you, Calder. Taking in someone like her, well, charity's a Christian virtue, I suppose." She closed the door behind her with just enough force to rattle the frame. Silence stretched like rope. Ada exhaled. "She'll be back." "Let her," Calder said, turning back to the kitchen. "The walls are thicker than she thinks." An hour later, the preacher arrived. He was an old man with a voice like creaking timber, a white beard, and a hat that looked like it had seen more baptisms than Sundays. Boone Red Elk came too, brushing snow from his coat and nodding to Ada like they were already old friends. "You ready for this?" Boone asked her, as he poured a measure of cider from the pot Inez had simmering on the stove. Ada looked down at herself, at the two long sleeves rolled up the boots she wore instead of shoes, the braid hanging heavy over her shoulder, and nodded once. "Yes." The ceremony was short, simple. The preacher read from a worn leather Bible and said the words with gravity. Calder's hands, rough and calloused, felt warm around hers. "I do," he said, looking straight into her eyes. "I do," she echoed, her voice steady. There were no violins, no guests, just wood crackling in the fire and the wind pressing against the windows like it wanted to listen in. When it was done, Calder kissed her, not deeply, not showy, just a press of mouths that said, "This is real." Boone clapped once. Inez wiped her eyes when no one was looking. And Ada. She stood tall, taller than anyone in the room, but she didn't shrink, not even once. After the preacher left and Boone rode off into the dusk, Calder took Ada's hand again. "Come with me." She followed him upstairs, her heartbeat steady but rising. They reached the door at the end of the hall, the master bedroom. Calder paused, then opened it slowly. Inside was a room carved from stone and light. The bed was massive, draped in heavy quilts and furs. A window overlooked the back pasture where the snow had started falling harder. There was a carved chest at the foot of the bed and 2 chairs by the hearth. "I had the bed made special," Calder said. "Taller frame, wider posts. Thought maybe it ought to fit both of us." Ada stepped inside, fingers brushing the frame. "It's beautiful. I didn't want you sleeping in some guest room on your first night here." "You mean my first night as your wife?" Calder nodded. "I didn't want to assume anything. But this room, it's yours now, if you want it." Ada turned to him. "You really don't know what to do with me, do you?" He shrugged. "I know what not to do." She sat on the edge of the bed. "Delilah's right about one thing." Calder stiffened. "This isn't a normal marriage. We're building something new. And maybe it won't look like anything the town understands. But I'm not here to fit into their rules." He sat beside her, voice quiet. "I never wanted you to." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling in the hearth, warming the room slowly. "I'm not ready for anything tonight," Ada said honestly. "Not yet." "I'm not asking for anything," he replied. "Only that you stay." She leaned her shoulder against his. "That I can do," and he stood and pulled the quilt back. She slipped beneath it, fully clothed eyes, watching the shadows dance across the ceiling beams. He lay beside her, not touching, just breathing. "Good night, wife," he whispered. "Good night, husband," she murmured, smiling in the dark. The room was dark, save for the soft flicker of firelight from the hearth. Outside the windows, wind pressed against the glass like a restless hand carrying snow with it. Ada sat up slowly in bed, the heavy quilt falling into her lap. Her heart thudded, not from fear, but from something far more raw. Calder stood at the foot of the bed, holding a carved cedar box in both hands, like it was a sacred thing. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, and the firelight caught the edge of a shadow across his face that made him look like a man about to step into confession. "I need to show you something," he said. Ada didn't speak. She only nodded once and shifted to make space beside her. He crossed the room and set the box between them on the quilt. The wood was dark with age, the lid etched with symbols she didn't understand. Spirals, claw marks, a rising sun. She reached out, brushed her fingers over it, then drew her hand back like it had burned her. "What is it?" she asked. Calder didn't answer immediately. He sat on the edge of the bed facing the fire. For a long moment the only sound was the wind and the soft creak of the house settling. "This box belonged to my grandmother, Esther Greyhawk," he said finally. "She gave it to my mother when she married my father. My mother gave it to Sarah, and now it's mine to give." Ada's pulse quickened. The air between them thickened with weight. He opened the lid slowly. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was an emerald ring, deep green, heavy, shaped like a storm caught in stone. Next to it, neatly folded, were official documents. Paper yellowed at the edges, stamped, sealed, and signed. Ada leaned closer. "Is that the deed?" Calder said. "To half of Greyhawk Hollow. Your name is already on it. Ada Rose Greyhawk." Her hands trembled before she could stop them. "You're putting that inside me," he turned to her sharply. "What?" She gestured to the box, to the ring, to the papers, to the legacy that came with both. "You're giving me land, a name, a family history, everything that makes this place what it is. And I just got here." You didn't just get here, Calder said. You fought your way here. Ada shook her head. I don't understand. Why me? Why not some proper widow from town, someone who can read fine script and make pie without burning it? Calder's voice was quiet. Because I already did that. I already married someone small and beautiful who everyone thought fit the part. She was a good woman. But this land, this life, it broke her. She died in a bed soaked with blood, and I buried my son with her before he ever took a breath. The silence between them shattered like glass. Ada looked away, throat thick. Calder exhaled. I swore I'd never do it again. Never watch another woman break trying to live a life meant for someone stronger. She whispered, You think I'm strong enough? I know you are. Ada stared down at the emerald. It's too much. Calder reached out, caught her hand in his. It's what you've always deserved. You've just never had someone who saw it. I can't be your ghost, she said. I can't wear her ring and sleep in her bed and pretend to be what she was. I don't want you to. Then what do you want from me? He looked at her eyes, fierce with something more than hope, something like belief. I want you to be the woman who never apologized for taking up space. I want you to wear this ring, not because it was Sarah's, but because it's yours now. I want you to take this land and make it yours, with your rules, your strength, your name. Ada let out a shaky breath. I can barely read. You know that, right? I don't need a wife who reads contracts. I need one who rewrites them. Tears burned behind her eyes. She looked at the ring, then the deed, then Calder. You really think I can do this? He nodded. You already are. She touched the edge of the emerald. It felt cool beneath her fingers like snow caught in sunlight. When I was 14, she said softly, I overheard a man say, I'd never marry unless someone needed a plow horse more than a wife. Calder's jaw clenched. My stepmother told me not to laugh too loudly. Said it made people uncomfortable. I once tried to walk smaller. Shoulders bent, head low. You know what happened? He shook his head. I walked into a damn doorframe and gave myself a black eye, she said, smiling bitterly. Calder smiled too, something warm breaking through the grief in his face. Ada picked up the ring. I don't know if I can carry this, but I want to try. He reached for her hand. May I? She nodded, and he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her. The green flashed in the firelight, fierce and bold and unyielding. You were never too much, he said. They were just never enough. She leaned into him, then resting her forehead against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, held her like he meant it. I'm not ready, she said. You don't have to be, he whispered. We have time. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in silence and firelight, the storm pressing against the windows, but never quite getting in. When they finally separated, Calder handed her the folded deed. Read it tomorrow. I'll help you through the words. Ada clutched it to her chest. This doesn't feel real. It is, he said. You're real. And this life we're building, it's ours. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge, but Ada stood on the porch, breath curling in the bitter air, eyes locked on the fields beyond the tree line. Her fingers were red from the cold, but she didn't tuck them in. The emerald on her hand caught a glint of early light, winking like it knew something she didn't. Inez stepped out behind her, with 2 steaming mugs, and handed one over without a word. Ada accepted it, wrapping both hands around the ceramic, like it might settle the war still waging in her chest. You're not wearing the ring to impress the men, Inez said, her tone flat as ever. Ada smiled, slow and steady. No. I'm wearing it to remind the land who I am. Inez snorted. Land doesn't care who you are. It only cares what you can survive. Then I'll let it watch. They stood in silence, the snow beneath the porch steps glittering like crushed glass. A raven landed on the fence post, head tilting toward Ada like it was considering her place. Inside, Calder's boots thudded against the floorboards. A minute later, he opened the front door and leaned against the frame. You sure you want to start today? Ada turned. You gave me land and a name. I'm not about to sit on a chair and wait to be decorative. He raised an eyebrow. I didn't think you would. I didn't come all this way to warm the house. I'm here to help run it. He pushed off the frame. All right then. We'll start with the ledgers. Let's see if we can't scare the numbers straight. They sat at the kitchen table. An hour later, papers spread out between them. The fire popped and hissed in the stove behind them. Ada stared at the pages. Ink blurred into squiggles that meant nothing. Her fingers tightened around her pencil. I don't know what I'm looking at, she admitted. Calder didn't flinch. I didn't either at first. I can't even read all the headings. You'll learn. Ada looked up, something fierce simmering under her ribs. You say that like it's simple. It isn't, Calder replied. But neither are you. He reached over, turned the paper toward himself, and pointed to a line. This column is head count, number of cattle per pasture. This one's feed cost. This, he pointed again, that's supply for spring. Fencing salt blocks medicine. She nodded slowly, letting it sink in. Calder glanced at her. We'll do 1 page a day. No hurry. Ada blew out a breath. I hate feeling stupid. You're not stupid. I just feel like it. He leaned back in his chair. That's because the world's been telling you to feel that way since you were a kid. But I've met stupid people, Ada. You're not one of them. You just didn't get the chance to learn right. Ada looked down at the paper again. The letters still looked like a foreign language, but she wasn't afraid of them. Not anymore. That afternoon, she followed Calder to the barn. Inez tossed her a pair of gloves that had clearly belonged to a man twice her size. They fit her perfectly. Boone arrived just after midday, riding up with 2 packs strapped to his saddle and a sly grin on his face. Well, he said, sliding off his horse, you look like you've already been sheriff of this place 3 days. Ada raised a brow. That a compliment? Boone chuckled. It's a fact. He handed her a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were hand-copied primer's pages, inked with large letters and simple words. Inez told me you were learning to read. Figured these might help. Ada took them without speaking. Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to kindness coming without a catch. Thank you, she said, meaning it. Boone tipped his hat. Ain't charity. You're gonna run this place someday. I'd rather you didn't confuse salt with grain. That night, Ada sat by the hearth and practiced writing her name. She didn't ask Calder to watch, but he did anyway, from across the room, eyes soft and proud. Every time her pencil scratched across the paper, her shoulders straightened a little more. She was still Ada. Still too tall, too strong, too loud. But for once, none of that was too much. It was just right. Later in the dark, Calder climbed into bed beside her and lay close enough to share warmth, but far enough not to press. I saw you ride today, he murmured. Boone helped me adjust the stirrups. You looked like you'd done it 100 times. Ada smiled in the dark. Maybe in another life. Calder was quiet for a while. Then he said, I don't want to push you. You're not. This is all new. For both of us. I know. She turned to face him. His eyes caught the fire's last glow, full of fear, yes, but also something close to reverence. I'm not perfect, Calder, she said. I'm rough. I forget to soften my voice. I don't know how to be someone else. Good, he whispered. I didn't marry someone else. She reached for his hand and found it trembling. It made her heart ache in places she hadn't known were still alive. I've spent my whole life apologizing for my size, she whispered. Not anymore. He squeezed her fingers. Then don't. The next morning came with wind so cold it cracked the water troughs. Ada rose early, braided her hair, and helped Inez bake bread. By mid-morning she had memorized the numbers for the north pasture and corrected Calder when he miscounted. You're dangerous, he teased. Only if you underestimate me. Later they rode out together, checking the eastern edge of the land. Ada noticed a stretch of fallen fencing timber chewed low to the ground. Beaver, she muttered. Calder raised a brow. That's a good eye. I read about it last night. He smiled wide and slow. You're not just learning. You're growing teeth. They rode back in companionable silence. The hollow appeared through the snow like a fortress waiting for its queen. Back inside, Calder handed her a folded map. This is the rest of the property. Next week, I want you to pick one project. Something to claim for your own. Ada unfolded it, eyes scanning the ridgelines and valleys. She pointed to a plot near the river bend. What's this? That's the old orchard. My grandmother started it. Got abandoned after my mother left. Ada traced the border. Then that's where I'll begin. Calder looked at her. You sure? She looked up, eyes gleaming with purpose. I want something that belongs to the women here. Something that remembers them. The sky was still dark when Ada pulled her boots on and laced them tight. The wind outside howled low like something hungry, and the cold crept in under the doorframe. But Ada was already awake, already dressed, already moving. Her coat was thick, her gloves stiff from the drying leather, but she didn't flinch as she stepped outside and into the biting air. Snow dusted the ground in a fine layer that would become ice by mid-morning. The barns loomed like sleeping giants under the pale moonlight, and inside one of them a mare was struggling to bring life into the world. Boone had sent word the night before. Something was wrong. The foal hadn't turned. Ada jogged across the yard. Her breath came in puffs, her hair braided and pinned up under her scarf. The lantern in her hand swung with her stride, casting long, warping shadows across the snow. Boone met her at the barn door, bundled in furs and rubbing his hands together. She's been groaning all night, he said. Hips aren't opening right. Might be twins. Or might be a wrong turn. Where's Calder? Up in the north pasture. Fence lines down. Sent word he'll be back by midday. Ada nodded and pulled the door open. The smell hit her first wet hay blood panic. The mare stood in the far stall, foam on her flanks, eyes wide with pain. Inez stood beside her, one hand on the mare's neck, whispering something low and soothing. She's close, Inez said without looking up. But she's stuck. If we wait, we lose both. Boone passed Ada a basin of warm water. You ever done this? Ada rolled up her sleeves. No. Good, Boone muttered. Means you're not afraid yet. Ada stepped into the stall. The mare's sides heaved and her back legs shook with each contraction. Ada knelt beside her, not caring that her knees hit the muck. She reached in, slow and sure, remembering the diagram from one of the primer pages Boone had given her. There, a leg. then another. Wrong angle. She's bent wrong, Ada said. Back first. Boone cursed. Can you turn her? I'll have to. The stall was tight. The mare's body was fighting muscles, clenching slick with sweat and strain. Ada braced one foot against the wall and gritted her teeth. Come on, she whispered. Come on, little one. Help me. She pulled gently, inch by inch, guiding the foal's limbs into the right position. Time blurred. Her arms ached, sweat trickled down her spine. The mare let out a scream that echoed through the barn. Then movement. The foal slipped free in a rush of blood and afterbirth, collapsing into the hay like a sack of wet cloth. Ada dropped to her knees, gasping. Boone was already beside her, clearing the foal's nostrils, rubbing it with a rough towel. She's breathing, he said. Ada let out a laugh that turned into a choked sob. The mare nickered weakly. Ada turned and stroked her flank. You did good, she whispered. We all did. Inez handed her a clean rag and a mug of something hot. Ada drank without asking what it was. Her whole body trembled, but not from the cold. You all right? Boone asked, wiping his hands on his coat. Ada looked up at him, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy. This ranch, she said, voice low but clear, needs a general, not a porcelain doll. Boone stared at her for a moment. Then he smiled, slow and wide. Well, looks like it got one. By the time Calder returned that afternoon, Ada had cleaned the stall, washed the mare, and even managed to write the new foal's birth time in the ledger, blocky, uncertain handwriting, but legible. He stepped into the barn, wind clinging to his coat, and paused when he saw her kneeling beside the mare, brushing her neck. How bad was it? Ada stood, hands covered in hay dust, sweat drying on her brow. Bad enough to break something. Calder stepped closer. But you didn't. No, she said. I didn't. He looked at her, then the foal, then back to her again. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something close to awe. You did this, he said. Ada nodded once. With help. They walked back to the house together. Snow had started to fall again, thick flakes drifting in slow circles. Ada flexed her fingers inside her gloves. Her body was sore, her back tight, but her chest felt like it had grown twice its size. Inside, Inez was baking. The smell of yeast and garlic filled the air. Ada went to the sink and scrubbed her arms clean. She caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror over the basin. Her face was red from exertion. Her braid had come loose strands clinging to her damp skin. She didn't look dainty. She didn't look delicate. She looked like herself. That night, Calder laid a map out across the kitchen table. A blank sheet with the ranch boundaries drawn in thick pencil. You said you wanted a piece to make your own. Ada nodded. The orchard. I remember. I started asking around, he said. My grandmother's cousin still has seeds. Old roots. Apple, plum, even some early cherry. You could plant come spring. Ada leaned over the map. If I clear the southern slope, it'll catch sun first. Smart. She looked up. We'll need fencing. Soil turning. Calder's smile was subtle. I'll help. She tapped the map. No. I'm leading this. He raised both hands in surrender. Yes, ma'am. That night, Ada couldn't sleep. Her muscles ached. Her brain spun with plans. She slipped out of bed and walked through the silent house. The wind had died. The fire had burned low. She found herself in front of the nursery door again. The one Calder had never opened. Without thinking, she reached for the handle. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was unfinished. The walls were still painted soft yellow. A rocking chair sat in the corner draped with a folded blanket. There was a small dust-covered crib against the far wall. Ada stepped in. She touched the chair, then the crib rail. "I'm not her," she whispered to the room, "but I'm here now." She turned and closed the door behind her. The snow hadn't melted, but something in the air had changed. It was sharper now, like the wind carried a warning. Ada stood on the porch with Boone beside her, both staring down the long stretch of frozen road leading toward Greyhawk Hollow. The sun was only beginning to rise, casting a cold gold light across the pines. Boone sipped from a tin mug and muttered Delilah's back. "And she's not alone." Ada didn't move. "What's she bringing this time?" Boone nodded toward a pair of silhouettes just emerging from the tree line. One was unmistakably her, wrapped in furs and arrogance, and beside her rode two men dressed too clean for the land. Long coats, black gloves, briefcases strapped to their saddles instead of bedrolls. "Lawyers," Boone said, "and offers that stink like rot." Ada clenched her jaw. Let them come. By the time they arrived, Calder was already standing beside Ada. He'd come wordless from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, reading the air the way you read a storm cloud. His eyes found Delilah's and didn't blink. Delilah dismounted like she owned the porch, brushing snow off her coat. "Good morning," she said sweetly, stepping up the stairs like she belonged there. "No, it ain't," Boone said under his breath. Ada stood with her arms crossed, blocking the doorway. "Say what you came to say." The taller lawyer stepped forward. His voice was smooth and empty. "My name is Gordon Rusk, representing Vaughn Holdings. We're here with a formal buyout offer." He handed Ada a sealed envelope. She didn't take it. "What part of this looks for sale to you?" Calder asked, voice low. Rusk gave a diplomatic smile. "Everything's for sale, especially land this valuable." Ada's voice cut through the cold. "This land isn't dirt to be flipped. It's breath and blood. It remembers every boot that walked it, every woman who bled into it, every child who never had the chance to be born here." Delilah rolled her eyes. "Sentimental talk won't stop progress." Boone stepped forward. "Neither will lawyers." The second man, shorter and meaner-looking, opened his case and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "This ranch owes back taxes on 30 acres. You've got 3 missing survey markers, and your marriage deed hasn't even cleared state validation yet. That's a lot of legal holes, Mrs. Greyhawk." Ada stepped closer, the emerald ring on her finger catching a shard of morning light. "You think paper matters more than the people who live here know," said Rusk smoothly. "But it matters more to the bank." Delilah smiled like a fox circling a weakened calf. "You don't have the money. You don't have the lawyers. And you sure as hell don't have the bloodlines to stake a legacy here." Ada didn't flinch. "You're wrong." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door wide open behind her. Calder followed, silent but seething. At the kitchen table, Ada sat down and opened the drawer where she'd stashed the deed Calder gave her. She unrolled it, smoothed the corners, and stared at her name, Ada Rose Greyhawk, inked in solid, unshakable black. "They can't erase this," she said, "even if they try." Inez came in from the back room, arms dusted in flour. "Are they still outside?" "Yep." "Then it's time." Ada looked up. "Time for what?" Inez went to the hearth and pulled down an old box from the mantel. Inside it were letters, receipts, notarized bills of sale dating back nearly 60 years. "This ranch was paid in full in 1912, she said. "And Esther Greyhawk filed her first land claim with the Bureau of Homesteads the year before that." It may not look like much, but it's all still valid. Calder leaned over the documents. How do you still have these? Inez didn't look up. Because women remember what men forget. They returned to the porch with the papers bundled under Ada's arm. Rusk smirked. What now, family story hour? Ada stepped down the stairs and into the snow. No. You're trespassing on federally registered homestead land, recognized by the Department of the Interior. I have 5 affidavits of inheritance, 2 generations of notarized land taxes, and a current marriage certificate pending full state record, which means I have every right to kick your snake boots off my porch. The shorter lawyer frowned. Even if this is true, you're still behind on taxes. I'm aware, Ada said, and I have until March to pay. We're not selling. Not now, not ever. Rusk shifted. You're making a mistake. Ada stepped closer, close enough to smell the city on him. You came to buy the land. What you didn't expect was that the land had already chosen its keeper. She turned and handed the tax envelope to Boone. Ride into town. Make a payment on the 30 acres. I'll cover the rest in a week. Boone raised a brow. How? I'll tell you when I figure it out. He grinned. That's the spirit. Delilah glared. You don't get to win just because you yell louder. Ada smiled. No. I get to win because I don't run when it's hard. They watched the lawyers pack their bags, muttering threats, and we'll be in touch warnings. Delilah lingered, her eyes locked on Calder. You're really choosing her? She asked. Calder didn't blink. I already did. Delilah looked at Ada one last time. You'll break, you know. This place breaks everyone. Ada held her gaze steel behind her eyes. Then it'll have to work harder. By dusk, they were gone. That night, Ada sat by the fire, her hands still shaking. Not from fear, but from the rush of standing tall and not folding. Calder sat beside her. I've never seen anyone talk to a lawyer like that. Was it too much? No, he said. It was exactly enough. She looked at him, eyes tired but bright. I meant what I said. I don't know how I'll make that money. We'll figure it out. You sure? Calder nodded. I trust you. She leaned into him. That might be the scariest thing anyone's ever said to me. They sat in the quiet, the warmth of the fire washing over them, the storm outside finally moving on. The rain came hard and sudden that morning, slapping sideways against the windows and soaking the porch within minutes. The hollow's usual stillness was gone, replaced by the sharp drumming of water against wood and the muted tension of something not quite right. Ada was at the kitchen table studying the orchard plans and chewing the end of her pencil when the front door burst open. Boone stormed in, dripping wet, his hat flung off, before the door even closed behind him. His boots tracked mud across the floor, but no one said a word. His face said more than enough. There's trouble, he said, voice flat, controlled but urgent. Calder stepped in from the hallway, towel in hand, halfway through drying off after morning chores. We're south fence, Boone replied. It's down. 24 head missing, maybe more. And it ain't storm damage. Ada stood. Wolves, Boone shook his head. Too clean. No blood, no tracks of panic. Just gone. Calder's face darkened. Rustlers. Boone hesitated. That or sabotage. Fence was cut. Wire spliced through clean. No teeth, no claw marks. Ada's blood chilled. They're sending a message. This ain't wolves, Boone said quietly. This is a warning. She turned toward the rack and grabbed her coat and rifle. Then let's send one back. They rode out before noon, Calder, Boone, and Ada, cutting a sharp line through the trees and pastures, the wind drying rain off their coats as they moved. Ada felt the cold bite deep, but she didn't flinch. The rifle slung across her back felt like an extension of her spine now. She wasn't the girl stepping off the train anymore. She was something else, something solid. The south fence line ran nearly half a mile along a low ridge bordered by forest. By the time they reached the break, the clouds had parted, and a sickly pale light cast shadows on the mud. Calder dismounted first, crouching near the broken wire. "Clean cut," he muttered. Boone pointed with his boot. Tracks headed east. Narrow. 2 horses, maybe 3. Not heavy riders. Ada stepped down and surveyed the scene. The tension in her chest tightened. They knew what they were doing, she said. Came fast, didn't linger. Moved the herd quiet and clean. Boone straightened. This wasn't just theft. This was planned. Calder looked at Ada. Delilah Ada didn't hesitate. She lost her power play. Now she's throwing punches in the dark. They followed the tracks into the trees for nearly 2 miles. The mud thinned, but Boone had an eye for disturbed brush and snapped twigs. At the edge of a dry creek bed, they found the first real sign, a broken lead rope and a cigarette still half-smoked. Ada picked it up and sniffed. "City tobacco," she said. "No ranch hand rolls this." They doubled back and returned to the ranch by dusk, the herd still down the air, tighter than before. In the barn, Calder pulled out the records and counted again. 23 head missing, mostly young. Prime stock. "We can't afford this," he said. "Not with tax on our backs and planting season around the corner." Ada sat on a hay bale, wiping mud from her boots. "They want us off the land. We knew that. Now they're trying to bleed us into selling." Boone stood with arms crossed. "We need to tighten the fences." "Post guards." Ada looked up. "We don't have the men." "Then we post women," said Inez, stepping into the barn. She held her shotgun like it was part of her arm. Boone blinked. "You volunteering I didn't spend 40 years baking bread to let some suit run me off my home." Ada grinned. "Then it's settled. We take shifts. Nobody rides alone." That night, Ada took the first watch. The sky had cleared stars, pricking through like pins. She stood on the porch, rifle resting beside her blanket around her shoulders. Calder joined her halfway through, silent as ever. "They think we'll give up," Ada said. "They think we're soft. They think wrong." She looked at him. "What happens when it gets worse?" He stared into the dark. "Then we get louder." Ada nodded to the silence between them, less heavy now, just watchful. In the distance, a coyote cried out. "They're testing us," she said, "trying to find the cracks. We've got some. Then we seal them." They went to bed late, both fully clothed, rifles near the door. The next morning, a letter arrived, no return address, no postage. Just a folded page slid under the barn door. Ada opened it with gloved fingers. The message was printed in clean, square handwriting. "Every day you stay, another piece goes missing. Sell now. Leave before we make you." Calder's hands clenched the note so tight it tore in half. Cowards. Ada took the pieces and tucked them into her journal. "Let them write their threats. I'll write our legacy." Boone came in from the field panting. Fence on the east side cut again. This time they left a dead calf at the edge. Ada's stomach turned. "They're baiting us. We take the bait." Calder said we give them what they want. Ada looked at Boone. "Can you track where they came from?" Boone nodded. "Not alone. I'm coming." That afternoon, they saddled up and rode east, following the thin trail left behind by boot prints and wheel marks. Boone found a trailhead leading to an abandoned hunting shack tucked between two ridges. They approached, slow, rifles raised, breath held. Empty. Inside, they found maps, discarded tools, and a whiskey bottle labeled Vaughn Holdings, client gift. Ada picked it up, turned it in her hand. This is their nest. Then we burn it, Boone growled. Calder shook his head. No. We keep it. It's proof. They packed the evidence, then headed back to the ranch under a blood-orange sky. At dinner, Ada barely touched her food. She stared out the window instead, the shadows stretching long and mean across the hollow. They're not going to stop, she said. No, Calder replied. But neither are we. She stood, lifted her glass, and raised her voice. To the land. To those who worked it, buried their bones in it, and bled for it. We stand because they stood. We stay because they stayed. Everyone lifted their glasses in silence, and in that silence the hollow felt like it was listening. The horse's hooves hit the frozen ground like a warning bell. Ada was already at the front porch, rifle in hand, lantern swinging low from her fingers. The rider came out of the trees, slow, deliberate, every movement measured. His duster coat flapped with the wind, and even from a distance, Ada could see the tin glinting on his chest. He reined in the horse a few feet from the porch and lifted his hat. State Marshal Jonathan Pike, he called out. I've got questions about a sabotage report filed by one Ada Greyhawk. Ada didn't lower the rifle. Then I hope you brought a notebook, 'cause I've got stories to tell. The marshal didn't flinch. Mind if I water my horse first? She stepped back and held the door open. Only if you like your coffee black and scalding. Inside, the fire crackled, and the house smelled of garlic and smoke. Inez raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. Boone leaned against the wall with arms crossed, watching Pike like a hawk eyeing a coyote. Pike removed his coat, shook off the snow, and took the chair Ada offered at the kitchen table. His notebook came out fast, pen at the ready. You said there were cut fences, missing cattle, and a death threat. Ada laid the torn note on the table beside a folder of copied documents, land deeds, herd logs, Boone's sketches from the saboteur's trail. Pike flipped through them without speaking, then looked up. That's a hell of a start. It ain't the start, Ada said, leaning forward. It's been brewing for months. Started when Delilah Vaughn rode back into Bitterroot, with slick-talking lawyers and city greed in her saddlebag. Pike raised a brow. You got proof she's behind this, Ada said. Not the kind that fits in an envelope. But every time something goes wrong, she shows up smelling like roses and rust. Calder came in, wiping grease from his hands. We found a shack east of the fence line. Tools, maps, Vaughn Holdings whiskey bottle. They left it behind, like a signature. Pike jotted something down. You took photos. Boone stepped forward. Got sketches. Want me to ride out with you tomorrow? Pike nodded. Dawn. Ada poured coffee for everyone, though her hands shook. Not from fear, anger. She couldn't shake the image of the dead calf they'd found by the fence last week. It wasn't just theft. It was a message. What else? Pike asked. Ada leaned back. They're trying to cut off our income. They stole prime cattle, tampered with our supply line. I had an order of orchard saplings go missing last month. Shipped, never delivered. Pike paused. Sabotaging your planting season, Ada nodded. They're trying to choke us from the roots. He scribbled again, fast. I'll need names, witnesses, and anything that ties Delilah or her company to hired muscle. Calder exchanged a glance with Ada. Boone might have something. Boone crossed the room and retrieved a folded flyer from his coat. I saw this in town. Vaughn Holdings is offering bonus relocation incentives for ranchers looking to sell early. Problem is, we weren't even notified our land was under assessment. Pike scanned the paper. That's shady as hell, but not illegal. Ada slammed her mug down. Then help me make it illegal. Pike stared at her for a beat too long. Then he nodded. I'm not here to look the other way. They talked late into the night, Pike listening more than speaking, occasionally asking sharp, pointed questions that forced Ada to relive every cut fence, every missing head, every sleepless night, staring at shadows across the pasture. When it was over, Pike closed his notebook. I'll file a report in Helena. Might take a few weeks to get a formal investigation opened. But I believe you. Ada stood. Weeks is too long. Then you'd better stay vigilant. Keep records. Don't retaliate. They're baiting you into a mistake. As Pike left, Ada walked him to the porch. Why are you helping us? He looked out at the snow-covered land. Because I've seen what greed does to honest soil. And this place feels honest. She watched him ride off until the shadows swallowed him. The next morning, Ada sat at the table reading over Inez's inventory of remaining supplies. The numbers were grim. Enough feed for 3 weeks. Limited fencing materials. Orchard prep on hold. We're bleeding, she whispered. Calder sat down beside her. Then it's time we plug the wounds. They gathered the hands Boone Inez, 2 local boys Calder had trained last year, and assigned shifts. Fencing patrols. Barn watch. Even young Naya from down the river, not yet 16, volunteered to stand guard with her slingshot and a spine like steel. That evening, Ada rode out alone, needing space. The orchard plot sat quiet under snow, just faint mounds of earth where roots would someday grow. She dismounted and knelt, brushing the snow off the soil. This is where it starts, she whispered, and I won't let them burn it down. The wind howled, but she stayed, fingers buried in frozen dirt, drawing strength from the stillness. Suddenly, hoofbeats. She turned, rifle half drawn. It was Boone riding hard. Message from Pike, he shouted. Helena filed the report. But there's a complication. Ada stood. What kind? Pike dug up old land grants tied to Delilah's grandfather. Turns out a 10-acre strip bordering our south fence was never properly recorded. She frowned. Meaning she's claiming it now. And the judge granted her a hearing in 2 weeks. Ada's heart dropped. If that land's hers, she can legally push into our fence line. Boone nodded grimly. And push us out from the edge inward. She mounted quickly. Let's ride. Back at the ranch, Ada laid the old deeds out across the table. She traced the hand-drawn borders, her mind moving fast. We need proof that strip's been worked by the Hollow for years. Grazing records, fence repairs, hell, even Inez's pie sales if they were delivered from that side. Inez stepped in, apron already off. I've got ledgers, receipts going back 10 years. Boone grinned. We build a case. Calder tapped the map. We fight fire with foundation. Ada looked at each of them in turn. If we win this hearing, we hold our line. If we lose... Boone finished her sentence. We bleed out from the border. Ada's jaw set. Then let's sharpen every nail, stack every word, and show them that a ranch built by women won't fall to men with gold teeth and cold hearts. The envelope was heavy, thicker than normal paper, and sealed with a wax stamp the color of dried blood. Ada ran her thumb along the edge of it, her gut tightening as though the ink inside already knew how to hurt her. She didn't need to open it to know who had sent it. The seal bore a stylized V, flourished sharp, arrogant. She opened it anyway. Boone leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Calder stood behind her, reading over her shoulder in silence. Inez watched from the kitchen doorway, her fingers dusted in flour and her brows drawn tight. Ada read it aloud, her voice like gravel. Summons to testify. Bitterroot County Courthouse, February 6th. Boone shook his head. Delilah's pulling strings already. Calder didn't move. His voice was low. She's not trying to win the land. She's trying to break you before you ever sit in that courthouse. Ada folded the letter slowly, deliberately, like she was sealing a choice. She should have tried that before I buried my hands in this dirt. They began preparing that night. The table became a war room. Inez brought every receipt, every delivery record she'd filed since the year Ada arrived. Boone contributed sketches of the disputed fence line marked with changes made over the last decade. Even the hired hands offered up their journals, feed schedules, and time cards, showing work done in the disputed strip. Calder reached out to a land surveyor in Helena, an old army buddy who owed him a favor. Within 2 days, the man rode out, gear in tow, and spent sunrise to sundown walking the south fence line. When he returned, he looked up from his notes and said simply, "She's lying." Ada allowed herself a small smile. "Put it in writing." The hollow buzzed with tension. Ada barely slept. Every night she replayed court questions in her mind. What is your legal standing? Were you present when the property boundary was established? Have you used this land exclusively and openly for over 7 years? She could answer all of it. But it wasn't the truth that frightened her. It was the noise, the sideways attacks, the things no judge could see, the whispers Delilah would plant, the doubt she'd sow in the gallery, the smiles that twisted in just the right places to make Ada look like a girl playing house with someone else's land. "I'm not Esther Greyhawk," Ada whispered one night. Calder stirred beside her, but didn't wake. She stared at the ceiling. "I'm not the kind of woman who wins these fights." But the land outside said otherwise. It slept under her care. It endured. And in that, Ada found the strength to rise the next day and keep building her case. A week before the hearing, a rider approached again. Not Pike this time. A woman in a long gray coat, dark eyes, and an accent that didn't come from anywhere near Montana. "I represent Vaughn Holdings," she said at the porch. "You'll want to hear what I have to offer." Ada didn't open the door. "Say it from there." The woman nodded once, cool and sharp. "Settle now. We'll withdraw the summons. You keep the hollow minus the disputed strip. You'll receive a compensation bonus. Clean exit. No blood on the floor." Boone appeared beside Ada. And if she says no, the woman didn't blink. Then Delilah goes to court. And Ada's past gets dragged out by its roots. Ada's fingers tightened on the edge of the door. "Tell your employer I plant my own roots now, and they go deep." The woman gave a small, almost respectful nod. "Then you'd best brace for a storm." She rode off without another word. That night, the wind howled worse than it had all winter. Ada stood in the barn after final check-ins on the livestock. Snow came down in slanting sheets, rattling the walls. The young foal, now 3 weeks old, nuzzled its mother sleepily. Boone passed her a mug of coffee. "You ready for this?" "No," Ada said. "But I'm not scared." He nodded. "That's what makes you dangerous." The morning of the hearing, the hollow was quieter than usual. Even the birds seemed to know what the day meant. Ada wore her long coat, the dark blue one Calder had helped stitch back together after it tore during the first blizzard. Her boots were polished. Her braid was tight. Calder kissed her cheek. Ride steady, I always do. Inez squeezed her hand. Don't let them confuse you. You know the truth. Just say it. Boone rode with her to town. They didn't talk much. Just the clop of hooves against the frozen ground, the wind tugging at their collars. The Bitterroot Courthouse stood like a cold, white sentinel on the hill. Its windows reflected gray skies and colder stairs. Inside it smelled of pine cleaner and paper. Ada's boots echoed on the tile as she entered the courtroom. Delilah was already there. Hair, perfect dress, crisp, smile, venomous. I almost thought you wouldn't show, she said sweetly. Ada met her gaze. You ever plant something and not see it through? Delilah's smile cracked for half a second. Then she turned away. The judge entered. The proceedings began. Ada testified first. She spoke clearly, calmly. Her voice carried the weight of long days in the snow, long nights in the barn, long months turning a hostile home into sacred ground. She spoke of the orchard plans of the calf, born in crisis of the hands, who'd lived and died on that land before her. She laid out the ledgers, the maps, the surveyor's report. When asked if she believed the disputed land belonged to Greyhawk Hollow, she didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, because land don't belong to names. It belongs to work, and no one's worked that land more than we have. Delilah's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Then came Delilah's turn. She painted Ada as an opportunist, a city girl, a temporary wife clinging to a legacy not hers. Her lawyers referenced Ada's old-school records, a misstep in a Denver job, even a long-ago debt Ada had forgotten about. The courtroom bristled. Ada stayed silent, because the land knew better, and so did anyone who'd ever stepped foot on it. The hearing ran long. By late afternoon, the judge recessed. A verdict would come the next day. Outside, snow had started to fall again. Boone helped Ada mount her horse. She said nothing until they were halfway home. Did I do enough? You did more than enough, Boone said. You stood up. Ada nodded. Then let the land speak now. The morning sun broke through the clouds like a quiet promise. Frost still clung to the edge of the window panes when Ada stepped outside, the letter still in her hand. The wind was gentle for once. It didn't bite. It didn't challenge. It just moved like breath across the valley, like something finally exhaled after holding on too long. Calder stood by the split-rail fence, arms folded, watching her the way he always did, like she was something made of storm and bone and something sacred. They came early, she said. Ryder from Bitterroot. Handed it to me without saying a word. He didn't ask what the letter said. He just looked at her like he already knew. Ada met his eyes. We won. Calder didn't smile, not right away. He stepped forward, brushed his thumb across her cheek, where the tears had already started to trace their path. But something's still wrong, he asked. She nodded, her voice soft. It shouldn't have taken this much just to prove I belonged here. He took the letter from her hand, folded it once, and slipped it into his coat pocket. Maybe not, he said, but now they'll never forget it. They stood together for a while in silence. The hollow spread out before them, half covered in snow, half waking up to spring. In the distance, the young foal kicked against the frost, testing its legs. Inez came outside with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Ada, one to Calder, and leaned on the porch post like she'd been part of the wood all along. I heard the rider, she said. Figured either we lost the hollow, or we just got too dangerous to mess with. Boone walked up behind them, hat low over his brow, chewing the end of a matchstick. So what now, boss? Ada turned to face them all. We build. It started that afternoon. Not in any grand way. No ribbon cuttings, No declarations. Boone and the boys began hauling fresh lumber from the shed to fix the fence permanently. No more patch jobs. Calder drew up irrigation plans for the orchard. Inez baked enough bread for a week and then declared they'd need a second smokehouse before the year was out. And Ada. She walked the perimeter of the property with her notebook marking where wild herbs had started to grow again, where new soil could be tilled, where life insisted on coming back even after a brutal winter. At the southern fence line, the one Delilah had tried to take Ada stood alone for a long time. The wood was still scarred where the wire had been cut. She didn't sand it down, didn't hide it. Some wounds needed to be seen to be understood. She pressed her palm flat against the post. "This place chose me," she said out loud, voice steady, "and I chose it back." That night, the hollow held a small celebration. Nothing loud, just firelight, food, and a fiddle someone found in the attic and tuned by ear. Ada sat on the porch with her boots off, watching Boone teach Nia how to two-step. Calder leaned beside her, drink in hand, relaxed in a way she hadn't seen since before the first fence was ever cut. Inez stood nearby with a whiskey in one hand and a slice of pie in the other, telling a story about the time Esther Greyhawk once chased off a grizzly with a shovel and a glare. "Is that true?" Ada asked. Inez raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't matter. It's true now." Everyone laughed, and Ada laughed with them full and deep, like the weight she'd been carrying had finally settled into something manageable. Not gone, just shared. Later, as the fire died and folks trickled off to their bunks, Calder walked her back inside. She stopped just before the door, her hand on the frame. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "We've got the land, the orchard, but everything's still fragile." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Fragile doesn't mean broken. It just means worth protecting." She kissed him then, not out of relief, but gratitude. For the fight, for the truth, for the man who never once tried to take the lead, but always stood beside her. They spent that night together without words, just breath and quiet, and hands that remembered every bruise, every scar, every moment they almost gave up. In the weeks that followed, the hollow bloomed. The soil once frozen and stubborn began to soften. Shoots pushed up from the ground like little fists declaring life. Boone built a greenhouse out back. Nia started a beekeeping project. The orchard trees arrived on the back of a freight wagon, late but alive. Ada planted the first tree herself. She didn't speak while she did it. Just dug her hands into the earth, placed the roots with care, and packed the soil in like sealing a promise. When she finished, she stood up, back sore, hands dirty, and said, "Grow anyway." The message from Vaughn Holdings never came. No appeal, no retaliation. Delilah was gone. Whispers said she left Montana entirely. Others said she'd moved back east to a marble office where land was just something you drew on paper and never touched with your own two hands. Ada never thought of her again. Not with anger, not even with triumph. Just like a bad storm you're glad to see pass. Spring gave way to summer. The orchard took root. The barn stayed full. And the hollow, for the first time in years, felt like it was breathing easy. People from town started coming out more. Curious, helpful. Some stayed. Some just brought pies and stories and stayed long enough to remind Ada that community wasn't just something you inherited, it was something you made. One evening, a schoolteacher from Bitterroot stopped by with her young son. She asked Ada if she'd consider hosting a harvest gathering in the fall, let the kids see what it meant to work the land. Ada thought about it for a moment, then said, "Let them come." Let them see what surviving looks like when it turns into living. As they rode off, Calder came up behind her. You planning on turning this into a town now? She shrugged. Not a town, just a home. And that in the end was what the Hollow had always wanted. Not a dynasty, not a monument, just a home. For hands that worked, for hearts that stayed, for roots that ran deeper than fear, longer than memory, and stronger than any man's claim to ownership. And Ada. She wasn't just part of the land now. She was its voice, its spine, its keeper. And the Hollow it kept her too, for good.